Hello there, and welcome back to Science for Sleep. Tonight we are going to explore the science of you. Not your body, not your brain in the purely biological sense, not the neurons and the synapses and the chemistry that we have explored in earlier episodes. Tonight we are going to explore something more intimate than any of that. We are going to explore the way you experience the world, the way you form impressions of other people and of yourself, the way you make decisions that feel completely rational but are shaped by forces invisible to you, the way you feel connected to the people around you and what happens when that connection is absent, the way your sense of who you are was constructed, slowly, over years, from the particular circumstances you happened to be born into. Psychology is the science of mind and behavior. It sits at the intersection of biology and culture, of the universal and the deeply personal. Some of what it has found applies to every human being who has ever lived, regardless of when or where. Some of it is exquisitely sensitive to culture and history and the particular moment in which a person grows up. What makes psychology remarkable is the way it holds both of these things at once, the universal and the particular, the species and the individual. Tonight, where are you listening from? Are you in a space that feels familiar? A room you have spent many hours in, surrounded by things you chose or were given or simply accumulated over time? That room and the way it feels to you is already psychology. The comfort or discomfort of it, the memories it holds, the degree to which it feels like a safe place or an uncertain one. These are not simply facts about a room. They are facts about you, filtered through the particular history that made you who you are. So let your body settle into wherever you are. Let the familiar sounds of the night arrange themselves around you. And let's explore the science of what it means to be a person. Let's begin. One of the oldest and most important discoveries in psychology is that perception is not passive. The eyes do not simply receive light and transmit it faithfully to a waiting mind. The mind is not a blank screen on which reality is projected unchanged. Perception is an active construction, a product of the interaction between incoming sensory data and the assumptions, expectations, memories, and knowledge that the mind brings to the encounter. This idea, so fundamental to modern psychology that it can seem obvious when stated plainly, was deeply counterintuitive when it first emerged. The common sense view of perception assumes that we see the world as it is, that the apple on the table looks red because it is red, that the face across the room looks sad because it is sad, that our experience of the world corresponds faithfully to the world as it exists outside us. Decades of careful research have shown this common sense view to be profoundly incomplete. The brain does not receive a complete, stable, high-resolution image of the world and process it. It receives a constant stream of fragmentary, ambiguous, incomplete sensory signals and constructs from them the seemingly seamless experience of a stable, continuous, richly detailed world. The gaps in sensory data are filled in automatically, using stored knowledge and expectation so smoothly that we rarely notice they are being filled. The blind spot in the human visual field, the region of the retina where the optic nerve connects and which contains no photoreceptors, is a clear example. Every human being has a small region of complete visual blindness in each eye. We do not experience this blindness because the brain fills in the missing region automatically, using information from the surrounding visual field. You are not aware of your blind spots not because they are small, but because your brain is constantly papering over them with plausible reconstructions. The phenomenon psychologists call change blindness demonstrates this even more dramatically. In a famous series of experiments, researchers showed participants a video of people passing a basketball and asked them to count the number of times the ball was passed. During the video, a person in a gorilla suit walked slowly through the scene. approximately half of all participants who watched the video failed to notice the gorilla. They were not inattentive people. They were focused people, doing exactly what they had been asked to do. Their attention was so fully directed at the task they had been given that a large, unexpected, clearly visible gorilla walked through their experience without registering. What we see is determined not only by what is in front of us, but by what we are looking for. Attention is a filter, not a mirror. The mind sees what it is prepared to see, and frequently misses what it is not expecting. This has profound implications. It means that two people standing in the same room, witnessing the same event, can have genuinely different experiences of it. Not because one of them is lying or mistaken, but because perception is constructed from sensory data plus expectation. And if the expectations are different, the constructions will be different. Memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus spent decades demonstrating that memories of witnessed events are not recordings, but reconstructions, shaped by the questions asked about them, the suggestions made in the aftermath, and the passage of time. Memory is not a photograph. It is a story we tell about the past, and like all stories, it is shaped by the teller. Human beings are the most intensely social species on Earth. This is not simply a description of how many of us there are, or how complex our social arrangements have become. It is a description of our biology. We evolved in small, interdependent groups in which social connection was not a luxury, but a survival requirement. The infant who failed to elicit care from adults died. The adult who was expelled from the group faced a sharply reduced chance of surviving. The capacity to read other minds, to understand intentions and predict behavior, to cooperate and compete, and navigate complex social hierarchies was the most important cognitive ability our ancestors possessed. It shaped the brain we carry with us today. The neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman argues that the default state of the human brain is not solitary cognition, but social thinking. When the brain is not occupied with any particular task, when it is allowed to idle, it defaults to thinking about other people, about their intentions, their feelings, their likely behavior. This default mode network is the brain's rest state, what it does when it is not doing anything in particular, and what it does is social. Loneliness, the experience of felt social isolation, is one of the most reliably harmful psychological states a human being can inhabit. Researcher John Cacioppo spent decades studying its effects and found that chronic loneliness is associated with elevated levels of cortisol, disrupted sleep, impaired immune function, accelerated cognitive decline, and a substantially increased risk of early death. The health effects of loneliness are comparable in magnitude to the health effects of smoking. Social disconnection is not a trivial psychological complaint. It is a serious biological threat. Conversely, the experience of genuine social connection is one of the most reliable sources of well-being available to human beings. The Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest-running studies of human life ever conducted, followed a group of men from early adulthood for more than 80 years. Its central finding was simple but striking. The quality of a person's relationships, more than any other factor measured, predicted how well they aged. Not wealth, not fame, not professional achievement. Relationships. The research on social contagion adds another dimension to the picture of humans as social animals. Emotions are not contained within individual people. They spread. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, studying the social networks of thousands of people over many years, found that happiness spreads through social networks 3 degrees of separation out. Not only does your own happiness influence the happiness of your friends, it influences the happiness of your friends' friends and the happiness of their friends, people you have never met and may not know exist. The emotional states we carry are not purely private. They radiate outward through the networks of relationships we are embedded in, affecting people across distances we cannot directly observe. Human beings like to think of themselves as rational decision makers, as agents who identify their goals, assess the available options, weigh the costs and benefits of each, and choose the option that best advances their interests. The psychological research on decision-making suggests that this picture, while not entirely false, is substantially incomplete. In the 1970s, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky began a collaboration that would eventually upend the dominant model of human decision-making. Their insight was that human judgment is systematically shaped by cognitive shortcuts, which they called heuristics, that operate quickly and automatically, but produce predictable errors under certain conditions. These errors are not random. They are consistent across people and across situations, which means they are not failures of individual intelligence, but features of the human cognitive system. One of the most robust of these biases is the anchoring effect. When people are asked to estimate an uncertain quantity, their estimate is powerfully influenced by any number they have recently encountered, even if that number is arbitrary and unrelated to the question. In a famous demonstration, Kahneman and Tversky spun a wheel of fortune in front of research participants before asking them to estimate what percentage of African countries were members of the United Nations. The wheel was rigged to stop on either 10 or 65. Participants who saw the wheel stop on 65 gave estimates averaging 45%. Participants who saw it stop on 10 gave estimates averaging 25%. A completely arbitrary number with no relevance to the question dramatically shaped the answers people gave. The availability heuristic describes the tendency to judge the likelihood of events by how easily examples of them come to mind. Events that are dramatic, recent, or emotionally vivid are more easily recalled, and therefore tend to be judged as more common than they actually are. Plane crashes receive extensive media coverage and are easily called to mind, leading people to overestimate the danger of flying relative to driving, which is statistically far more dangerous, but involves crashes that are individually less dramatic. The peak end rule describes how people evaluate past experiences. People do not average the pleasantness or unpleasantness of an experience across its duration. They judge it primarily by 2 points: the peak, the moment of most intense feeling, and the end, how they felt at the conclusion. The duration of the experience has surprisingly little effect on the overall evaluation. A medical procedure that ends more gently may be remembered as less painful than one that ends at the peak of discomfort, even if it was slightly longer. The mere exposure effect describes the finding that people tend to develop preferences for things simply because they have been exposed to them repeatedly. Stimuli that are familiar feel safer, more appealing, and more trustworthy than unfamiliar ones, even when the familiarity is the only relevant difference. The music that was playing when you were young is not simply familiar to you. It is aesthetically preferable to you in a way that feels entirely like a matter of taste, but is, in part, a product of repeated exposure during a formative period. How do you know who you are? This question might seem straightforward. You know who you are because you have memories of being yourself, preferences that feel distinctively yours, values that feel genuinely held, a continuous stream of experience that has been yours and no one else's since the moment you were born. But psychology has shown that the sense of self, while real and important, is also constructed. It is built from materials provided by culture, by the specific family and social context you grew up in, by the mirror of other people's responses to you, by the narratives you have developed over time to make sense of your experience. The self is not simply discovered, it is made. Charles Cooley coined the phrase "looking glass self" to describe this process. We come to know ourselves, he proposed, largely through seeing ourselves reflected in the responses of other people. A child who is consistently told they are funny comes to think of themselves as funny. A child who is consistently told they are clumsy comes to think of themselves as clumsy. The responses of significant others in early life contribute substantially to the self-concept that a person carries into adulthood. Research on the imposter phenomenon The experience of believing oneself to be a fraud who does not deserve one's achievements despite evidence to the contrary shows that it is particularly prevalent among high achievers. People who have substantial objective evidence of their competence can nonetheless carry a persistent belief that they are not as capable as others believe, that their successes have been lucky rather than earned, and that they are in constant danger of being exposed as a fraud. The imposter phenomenon affects a wide range of people across many domains and is not a sign of low intelligence or poor performance. It is a sign of a particular relationship between the self-concept and the evaluations of others. Psychological resilience, the capacity to maintain or recover well-being in the face of adversity, is one of the most extensively studied topics in positive psychology. The research has produced a striking finding. Resilience is not a rare trait possessed by exceptional people, it is common. The majority of people who experience even severe trauma show trajectories of recovery that return them to near baseline levels of well-being within months to years. The research does not minimize the genuine suffering that adversity produces, but it suggests that human beings are considerably more resilient than our intuitions about suffering tend to assume. One of the most consistent and counterintuitive findings in the psychology of well-being is that human beings are remarkably poor predictors of what will make them happy. We predict that major positive events, winning a lottery, getting a promotion, beginning a relationship, will produce large and lasting increases in our happiness. We predict that major negative events will produce large and lasting decreases. The research shows that in both cases, the predicted effects are substantially larger and more durable than the actual effects. Psychologists Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson coined the term impact bias to describe this systematic overestimation of the emotional impact of future events. We tend to underestimate our capacity to adapt to new circumstances, both good and bad, a capacity they call the psychological immune system. Just as the biological immune system works to protect us from physical threats, the psychological immune system works to protect us from emotional ones, finding ways to make sense of negative events, to reframe them, to find meaning in them. Research on lottery winners found that after an initial period of elevated happiness, most returned to approximately their pre-winning levels of well-being. Research on people who had become paralyzed in accidents found that after an initial period of acute distress, most returned to near baseline levels of happiness and rated their daily activities as considerably more pleasant than non-disabled control subjects had predicted. Experiences contribute more to lasting well-being than material possessions. The pleasure from a new object fades quickly as it is incorporated into the background of life. The pleasure from an experience, a trip, a concert, a shared meal, tends to be reconstructed each time it is remembered, and the memory does not fade in the same way. Flow, a concept developed by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, describes a state of complete absorption in a challenging activity in which the sense of time, self-consciousness, and concern for outcomes temporarily disappears. People in flow describe feeling simultaneously challenged and capable, so engaged with what they are doing that their ordinary preoccupations fall away. Research on flow has found it to be one of the most reliably positive psychological states available to human beings, accessible not through the achievement of particular outcomes, but through the quality of engagement with activities that are optimally challenging. The psychologist John Bowlby proposed that the bond between an infant and its primary caregiver is not simply a learned association produced by the caregiver's role in providing food. It is a biological system, shaped by evolution, whose function is to maintain proximity between the vulnerable infant and the more capable caregiver who can protect it from harm. His colleague Mary Ainsworth developed the strange situation procedure to assess the quality of attachment. She identified that securely attached infants, whose caregivers had been consistently sensitive and responsive, used the caregiver as a secure base for exploration, were distressed by separation, but readily comforted on reunion. Anxiously attached infants, whose caregivers had been inconsistently responsive, were highly distressed by separation and difficult to comfort on reunion. Avoidantly attached infants, whose caregivers had been consistently unresponsive, showed little distress at separation and little response to reunion, apparently having learned that expressing attachment needs produced nothing helpful. What is most striking about the research on attachment is not the existence of these patterns, but their modifiability. Attachment patterns are not fixed by early experience. They can change in response to later relationships, therapy, and the accumulated evidence of being treated consistently with care over time. People who grew up with inconsistent or unresponsive care can develop secure attachment patterns in adult relationships that are consistently warm and reliable. The past shapes, but does not determine the present. One of the most robust findings in positive psychology is that acts of kindness benefit the giver at least as much as the receiver. Sonia Lubomirsky and colleagues asked participants to perform 5 acts of kindness per week for 6 weeks. Compared to a control group, they showed significant increases in self-reported happiness. The neuroscience underlying the psychological benefits of pro-social behavior involves the same reward circuits activated by food and other primary reinforcers. Giving to others activates regions associated with pleasure and social bonding. These activations are larger when the giving is voluntary rather than compelled, suggesting that the psychological benefits of kindness are specifically tied to the experience of choosing to give. The psychological benefits of kindness may be explained in part by the shift of attention they produce. A mind focused on helping others is a mind directed outward, away from the preoccupations and ruminations about the self that are associated with depression and anxiety. Kindness is, in part, the practice of getting out of one's own head and into the experience of someone else. And that practice, the research suggests, is one of the most reliable routes to feeling better. Our experience of time is one of the most psychologically rich and strange aspects of human life. The experience of boredom produces the sensation that time is passing slowly. The experience of flow produces the opposite. Time flies when we are fully engaged. The hour that passes in 10 minutes when we are absorbed in something we love is the same 60 minutes as the hour that seems to last forever when we are bored. But it is experienced as a completely different duration. The psychologist William James observed more than a century ago that time seems to move faster as we age. The summer that lasted forever at 10 years old passes in what feels like a few weeks at 40. James attributed this to the decreasing novelty of experience with age. When we are young, almost everything we encounter is new, and new experiences are encoded in detail, taking up more space in memory and subjectively expanding the felt sense of the time they occupied. As we age, we encounter fewer genuinely new experiences, and the memories formed are less detailed, creating the impression of time having passed more quickly. The way we construct the narrative of our lives, the story we tell about who we are and how we came to be this way, has profound psychological effects. Psychologist Dan McAdams has found that people who construct their life narratives around themes of redemption, experiences in which bad things eventually gave way to good outcomes, growth from suffering, or the finding of meaning in adversity, show higher levels of well-being than those whose narratives are dominated by experiences in which positive things gave way to negative ones. The narrative we inhabit about our own life is not simply a description of what happened. It is a psychological environment we live inside, and its structure has consequences for how we feel. The most psychologically healthy narratives are not unrealistically positive. They acknowledge difficulty, failure, and loss. But they find in those experiences some element of growth, learning, or meaning that gives them a place in a larger story that is ultimately moving forward rather than simply accumulating losses. Those with the most relaxing psychology facts, and now the thinking can rest. You have spent this hour in the company of ideas about how you see, how you feel, how you decide, how you connect, how you construct the story of who you are. None of these ideas require anything of you right now. They are simply true. They were true before you heard them, and they will continue to be true in the morning. The room around you is a little quieter now. The thoughts that felt urgent at the beginning of this hour have settled into something softer. You are a social animal at rest. Your brain, which has spent the day reading other minds and navigating social complexity and making thousands of small decisions shaped by forces you were not aware of, is preparing for the work of the night. The kindness you showed someone today, or the kindness you received, is settling into the circuits that encode social experience. The moment of flow you found in something, absorbing, has left its trace. The relationships that sustain you, near or far, present in body or present in mind, are part of what your brain is holding as it drifts towards sleep. You are more resilient than you know, more connected than you feel in the lonely moments, more capable of change than the fixed quality of habit and personality sometimes suggests. What we actually are, it turns out, is something considerably more complex, more social, more surprising, and more capable than the common sense view tends to assume. And tonight, that complex and surprising thing is doing what it has always done at the end of a long day. It is letting go. Let the story pause for a few hours. Let the self rest from the work of being itself. Science for Sleep will be here when you return.